Welcome to Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, where we break down the most pressing intelligence and national security stories shaping our world. With over 25 years of experience in intelligence and law enforcement, Neil Bisson, the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network, and a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, delivers expert analysis that goes beyond the headlines. This week, we begin in China, where a former research engineer has been sentenced to death for selling state secrets in a case driven by revenge and desperation. What does this reveal about the psychology of espionage? Then, Silicon Valley faces a real-life spy scandal as two tech giants battle over allegations of corporate espionage straight out of the intelligence playbook. The Netherlands takes a bold legal step to counter foreign influence, passing a law targeting both digital and diaspora espionage. In Belarus, a Japanese national is sentenced for espionage. Was it legitimate or politically motivated? Europol uncovers how Russia is using criminal gangs to sabotage Europe from within, while Canada lays terrorism charges in a disturbing antisemitic case. Tesla dealerships become targets in a wave of politically charged attacks across the US. Is this the rise of a new kind of domestic extremism? And finally, Ontario police forces are reportedly using Israeli spyware, raising urgent questions about surveillance, privacy, and the future of cyber law enforcement. Stay tuned as Neil unpacks these critical developments. Now, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm Neil Bisson, a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. The world of intelligence keeps spinning, and it's not just governments and nations that need to pay attention. Private companies are being pulled into the shadowy world of espionage and domestic extremism, as we'll see in this week's episode. So let's get started. For our first story, we're starting with the high-profile espionage case out of China. A former Chinese research engineer, identified only as Liu, has been sentenced to death for selling classified material to foreign intelligence agencies. According to China's Ministry of State Security, Liu's motivations included revenge, debt, and desperation, all of which drove him to leak state secrets across multiple countries. Let's unpack the key elements of this case. Liu reportedly felt wronged by his former employer. In response, he deliberately saved a large cache of classified material before resigning, intending to use it for revenge and blackmail. After a string of failed investments left him in financial ruin, Liu reached out to an undisclosed foreign spy agency and sold the material as, quote, at a very low price. After they cut ties with him, he continued leaking secrets to multiple countries over a 6-month period. In the intelligence business, this is known as an intelligence peddler, someone who is looking to sell the same secrets to multiple agencies to maximize their return. From an intelligence perspective, this case is significant for several reasons. It highlights the human vulnerabilities, pride, resentment, greed that foreign intelligence agencies can often exploit. It shows that money is both an enticement and a detriment, as Liu was in debt and acted foolishly to try and peddle his information to anyone who would pay for it. It also underscores the threat posed by insiders, who are authorized to have access to sensitive material, especially when motivated by personal grievances or financial stress. And finally, it's yet another example of how economic instability and emotional factors can intersect, creating a perfect storm for espionage recruitment. This isn't an isolated incident. China has increasingly warned that its citizens are being targeted by foreign entities looking to co-opt them as spies. Just last November, another Chinese government worker was sentenced to death after foreign spies allegedly seized classified data from his USB drive and turned him into a, quote, puppet. And in February of last year, Australian writer Yang Hengjun received a suspended death sentence on espionage charges, a move that continues to draw international attention. Globally, we're also seeing a rise in espionage arrests involving Chinese nationals as governments become more attuned to foreign interference and infiltration risks. This story is also being used by the Chinese government to send a severe warning to its citizens. As many Western countries are pushing back against China's foreign interference and identifying their spy networks, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to ensure that Chinese citizens don't look to offer government or technological secrets. While Chinese state media provided their narrative, it's clear that Liu's case taps into the core intelligence issue of collection. What drives someone to betray their country? As someone who spent years recruiting and managing human sources, I can tell you, motivation is everything. It's not always about ideology. Often, it's about money, ego, or revenge. Intelligence agencies know this, and they're adept at identifying and exploiting these triggers. Understanding these psychological factors is essential in detecting, deterring, and countering insider threats. I'm currently teaching a course at the University of Ottawa in the National Security Program that touches on this very topic, the psychology behind human sources and intelligence collection. I'll leave a link in the show notes for anyone who's interested in taking the course. Leo's case is a classic example of how personal grievances and financial desperation can drive individuals to espionage. It also illustrates the methods foreign intelligence services use, often buying sensitive information from sources who feel trapped or wrong. As the Chinese government continues to fear its citizens providing information to Western governments, we can expect more of these cases to emerge. For our next story, we're shifting the focus from the world of government espionage to that of corporate espionage. A major lawsuit has rocked Silicon Valley. HR software giant Rippling has accused its competitor Deel of orchestrating corporate espionage through a planted spy. The case, now in federal court, is drawing comparisons to state-sponsored intelligence operations, and it raises serious questions about tradecraft in the corporate world. The heart of Rippling's case alleges that Deel cultivated an insider, a so-called Deel spy, who systematically stole trade secrets. This individual allegedly accessed internal Slack channels, customer data, sales strategies, and even Rippling's own playbook for competing against Deel. Then, he passed this data on to Deel executives and a journalist, all while actively employed by Rippling. Rippling claims this was a calculated move by Deel, violating U.S. racketeering laws and trade secret protections. The accusations go further. When confronted, the spy reportedly locked himself in a bathroom to delete evidence from his phone, ignoring a court order and warnings from an independent solicitor. From an intelligence perspective, the tactics here are classic insider threat indicators: unauthorized access to sensitive data, clandestine meetings, and attempted destruction of evidence under legal pressure. It's a potent reminder that espionage isn't confined to the corridors of national security. It thrives in high-stakes corporate environments as well, to the point that a lot of corporate espionage goes unreported as fears of declining stock prices and loss of intellectual property are not issues that most companies want to discuss with their board members or with shareholders. Corporate espionage has long been quiet, shadowy threat to tech firms, especially in sectors where innovation and intellectual property are at a premium. While Rippling and Deel are private entities, the techniques alleged mirror those of state actors: insider recruitment, exfiltration of data, and the obfuscation of a spy's true loyalties. In a wider context, this comes amid increasing global attention on IP theft, particularly from Chinese firms and proxies. Though in this case, the battle is between two Western startups. This lawsuit could set a new legal precedent for how aggressive companies can get their pursuit of competitive intelligence. This lawsuit could set a new legal precedent of how aggressive companies can get in their pursuit of competitive intelligence and how the courts interpret corporate spying under racketeering, influenced, and corporate organizations, or RICO laws, typically reserved for organized crime. Rippling CEO, Parker Conrad, said on X, "We are taking this extraordinary step to send a clear message that this type of misconduct has no place in our industry. While Deel has denied any wrongdoing, the fallout could damage reputation on both sides. From my personal viewpoint, insider threats remain one of the most underappreciated dangers, whether it's national security or corporate intelligence. Vetting, monitoring, and safeguarding data access are essential. This case may also encourage companies to invest in counterintelligence measures previously seen only in government operations. Rippling versus Deel is more than just a tech spat. It's a real-world example of modern espionage tactics applied to corporate competitions. The implications? A large surge in internal security reviews, legal action, and perhaps regulation aimed at curbing corporate spying. As always, the line between business intelligence and outright espionage remains thin, and the case could redraw it. What comes next? Potential criminal charges, reputational fallout, and a close watch of competitors who know now that spies might be lurking in their Slack channels as well. Our next story focuses on a headline-grabbing case out of Belarus. The story, entitled "Belarus Sentences Japanese Man to 7 Years in Jail for Espionage," covers the conviction and sentencing of a Japanese national accused of spying for Japan's intelligence service, an intelligence organization that rarely gets attention in the media. Let's take a closer look at the facts and what this reveals about the use and potential misuse of espionage charges in authoritarian states. Masatoshi Nakanishi, a Japanese national residing in Belarus since 2018, was sentenced to 7 years in prison after being convicted of espionage. The Belarusian authorities allege that over a 6-year period he took thousands of photos of military and civilian facilities near the Belarus-Ukraine border, which were then sent on to Japanese intelligence services. The trial, held behind closed doors in Minsk, resulted in Nakanishi's conviction for cooperating with a foreign intelligence agency in a manner harmful to the Belarusian national security. He was also fined €6,130. From an intelligence standpoint, this case brings into focus the high-risk nature of intelligence collection in hostile environments, especially in authoritarian regimes like Belarus. It also shows how such regimes may weaponize espionage laws to suppress dissent or control of foreign nationals. Belarus has a long history of suppressing political opposition and using its legal system as a tool for regime control. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus for over 30 years, leaning heavily on Russian support and allowing Russia to use Belarus as a launch point for military operations in Ukraine. Since the war in Ukraine began, Belarus has also allowed Russia to deploy tactical nuclear weapons on its soil, deepening its isolation from the West. Japan has imposed sanctions on Belarus and Russia over their roles in the conflict, which may further strain relations and complicate the diplomatic status of denied Japanese citizens like Nakanishi. No direct expert quotes were provided in the article, but the Vasna Human Rights Center, a Belarusian NGO, declared Nakanishi a political prisoner, highlighting concerns that the charges were politically motivated. An exiled opposition leader also condemned the sentence, stating that Nakanishi was being dehumanized by regime propaganda. My take on this is that in intelligence operations, especially human collection, operations and assets often operate in gray zones, where activities can be reinterpreted as espionage depending on the local regime's tolerance of strategic interests. This case exemplifies how foreign nationals engaged in benign activities, even something as innocuous as photography, can be accused of espionage in regimes seeking leverage or retribution on an international level. Masatoshi Nakanishi's conviction is not just about espionage, it's about geopolitical tension, diplomatic maneuvering, and authoritarian control. As relations between Japan and Belarus worsen, this case may set a precedent for future detentions and politicized trials involving foreign nationals. Looking forward, expect similar high-profile espionage accusations as tension rise between authoritarian regimes and Western powers. Cases like this underscore the growing complexity and risk of international intelligence operations. For our next story, we're examining a significant report from Europol that sheds light on how Russia and other state actors are leveraging criminal networks to increase sabotage and destabilization efforts across Europe. The article highlights a rise in politically motivated cyber attacks, sabotage of critical infrastructure, and other destabilizing activities. It explores how criminal proxies are becoming key players in this hybrid threat environment. The Europol report reveals a disturbing trend in which hybrid threat actors, particularly from Russia, are utilizing organized crime groups across Europe to carry out a variety of malicious activities. These include cyber attacks, sabotage, arson, data theft, and even migrant smuggling. The aim is to undermine the stability of the EU member states, destabilize democratic institutions, and disrupt public services. From an intelligence perspective, this is a clear example of how non-state actors, in collaboration with state actors, are becoming more involved in covert warfare. By relying on criminal gangs, Russia can deny direct involvement while still achieving strategic objectives. The impact of such operation is multifaceted. It erodes public trust in institutions, weakens the rule of law, and targets critical infrastructure, all while obscuring the origins of the attack. What's concerning is the growing sophistication of these hybrid threats. They aren't just isolated incidents. They're part of a broader, ongoing strategy that involves subtle, cumulative disruptions. Like insect pests attacking a forest, these attacks might appear to be random at first, but when viewed collectively, they reveal a strategic effort to destabilize European society and governance. This strategy of using criminal proxies isn't new, but it's evolving. Historically, we've seen state actors rely on proxy forces, whether militias, mercenaries, or intelligence agents, to carry out operations with plausible deniability. What's different now is the integration of cyber capabilities and the expanding role of organized crime. This marks a shift towards hybrid warfare, where state actors can leverage criminal networks to achieve political and military objectives without directly being involved in military engagement. Looking at recent examples, Russia has long been suspected of involvement in cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. However, the collaboration with organized crime groups for operations like migrant smuggling or arson attacks is new and troubling. It is a reminder that the lines between conventional warfare, cyber warfare, and criminal activity are becoming increasingly blurred. Europol's Magnus Brunner highlighted the novelty of criminal networks working on behalf of foreign powers, pointing out that threats can now enter the EU in mere seconds, whether it's a cyber attack or a migrant bus sent by state actors. Similarly, another Europol representative from Poland warned that the Russian invasion of Ukraine could have a lasting impact on European security, particularly in terms of black market weapons and ammunition. From the standpoint of a former intelligence professional, this evolving tactic underscores a new dimension of hybrid warfare. What makes these threats so potent is the integration of various actors, from state intelligence agencies to criminal networks, working in concert to destabilize the region. The use of criminal proxies allows Russia to conduct operations while avoiding direct attribution, making countermeasures more difficult. We travel back to Canada for our next story, where we're focusing on a troubling case out of Winnipeg. 19-year-old Nevin Thunder Young is facing terrorism-related charges following a series of antisemitic graffiti attacks. The charges include facilitating and participating in terrorist activities tied to suspected links with neo-Nazi ideology. According to RCMP, Young was originally arrested in January for spray painting swastikas and other anti-Semitic symbols in the Charleswood neighborhood. That alone is concerning, but now federal law enforcement has laid terrorism charges, which suggest a deeper involvement with a terrorist group or ideology. From an intelligence perspective, this is significant. While we often associate terrorism with large-scale attacks or international plots, domestic extremism, particularly in the far-right variety, is a growing threat in Canada and beyond. The application of terrorism charges here indicates that Young's actions weren't viewed as isolated vandalism. They were seen as a broader, ideologically motivated campaign of intimidation and hate. The RCMP's decision to pursue terrorism charges shows a shift in how Canadian authorities are treating domestic extremist terrorists. It's worth noting that the initials MKY were spray painted alongside the swastikas. According to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, those letters are associated with the transnational neo-Nazi group, a sign that Young may have been involved and aligning himself with, or even receiving direction from, an organized extremist entity. In recent years, we've seen similar patterns in both Canada and the United States, where young people are radicalized online and begin acting out in ways that escalate from hate speech to criminal actions, and sometimes terrorism. Local community leaders aren't taking this lightly. Avron Sharash, a Jewish Winnipegger, took the initiative to clean up some of the graffiti himself and stressed that neo-Nazis pose a threat not just to the Jewish community, but to society at large. Gustavo Zettner, from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, echoed that concern, calling for law enforcement to use every tool available to combat what is described as an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism. From my own professional standpoint, this case illustrates how acts of hate can quickly become national security issues, especially when links to extremist networks, even small or loosely organized ones, are discovered. This case in Winnipeg serves as a reminder of the evolving face of terrorism. It's not always foreign actors or large-scale plots. Sometimes it's young individuals influenced by extremist ideology close to home. Law enforcement's movement to apply terrorism charges sets a strong precedent and reflects a serious approach to combating domestic terrorism. For this next story, we're taking a closer look at a concerning series of attacks on Tesla dealerships and infrastructure across the United States. According to ABC News, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi is calling these events nothing short of domestic terrorism, as federal and local agencies investigate a growing trend of arson, vandalism, and gunfire targeting Tesla facilities. The most recent attack took place in Las Vegas, where 5 Tesla vehicles were set ablaze and shots were fired at others parked nearby. The suspect, dressed in all black, allegedly used Molotov cocktails and a firearm in the assault. The word resist was spray painted across the facility's doors, signaling a political or ideological motive. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force is now assisting in the investigation, and officials suspect that this was a targeted and isolated attack. This follows a similar incident in Kansas City, Missouri, where 2 Tesla Cybertrucks were destroyed in a suspected arson attack. Police are investigating, and while no arrests have been made, federal authorities are closely involved. In total, Tesla has experienced a wave of vandalism, arson, and even gunfire at its facilities in multiple states, including Oregon, Massachusetts, and South Carolina. What's driving this surge in violence? Much of it is backlash towards Elon Musk and his recent appointment as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, a new White House initiative. Since then, Tesla has become a political flashpoint, with protests, graffiti attacks, and now arson targeting the company. In South Carolina, a man was arrested after attacking a Tesla charging station with a Molotov cocktail while shouting anti-Trump messages and support for Ukraine. He's since been charged with arson of property and interstate commerce. This pattern of politically charged violence raises significant concerns for law enforcement and intelligence agencies alike, as it reflects how corporate targets can now become focal points in broader ideological or political conflicts, especially when high-profile figures like Musk are involved. Attorney General Pam Bondi emphasized the gravity of these crimes, stating that Justice Department is now pursuing 5-year mandatory minimum sentences for perpetrators, including those who may be funding or coordinating the attacks behind the scenes. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt pointed to a possible political motive, arguing that Tesla became a target after Musk voiced his support for Donald Trump, and she urged Democrats to condemn the violence. Musk himself has also commented, saying, "I've never physically hurt anyone, so why the hate and the violence against me? Because I am a deadly threat to the woke mind, parasite, and its humans that it controls? From an intelligence perspective, this is a classic domestic extremism case, blending anti-government sentiment, political polarization, and violent direct action. Regardless of Musk and his policy, the destruction of private property and the potential violence against innocent people who own this type of vehicle is not the way to protest the brand or the man. The fact that Molotov cocktails and firearms are being used shows a tactical escalation, which could embolden copycats or inspire further acts of sabotage. These attacks on Tesla are not just vandalism, they're being treated as domestic terrorism with potential ramifications for public safety, corporate security, and political disclosure in the US. Moving forward, we can expect increased security at corporate facilities, heightened attention from federal agencies, and possible new policies to counter the surge of ideologically motivated violence. For our last story, we're back in Canada for a revealing report from The Guardian detailing a growing ecosystem of military-grade spyware used within Ontario's police forces. Based on findings from Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, the report raises serious questions about Canadian law enforcement's reliance on tools developed by Israeli-based Paragon Solutions, and whether current laws are keeping up with the power and potential for misuse of such surveillance technologies. At the heart of the article is the uncovering of potential links between Ontario's provincial police, the OPP, and Paragon Solutions, a spyware firm known for its product, Graphite, capable of covertly infiltrating and extricating data from mobile phones. This revelation comes amid ongoing concerns about how Canadian authorities deploy cyber weapons, especially in the absence of updated privacy laws. While the OPP didn't deny using such tools, it emphasized that all surveillance is judicially authorized under Canadian law and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Still, the Citizen Lab report points to a growing use of spyware among police forces, with mentions of both the Toronto Police Services and York Regional Police considering or actively using spyware tools, referred to here as on-device investigative tools or ODITS. From an intelligence perspective, this highlights a significant shift. Cyber tools once reserved for national-level security threats are now part of standard law enforcement investigation. These tools are being used in response to the changing technologies used by terrorist groups, criminal organizations, and hostile intelligence agencies on a regular basis. Wiretapping and bug implanting have been replaced with cyber tools like zero-click spyware because people communicate using these types of devices. The same laws and responsibilities surrounding the implantation of bugs and wiretaps are still being adhered to. The bigger concern is the use of these techniques by nefarious actors against Canadians. Mercenary technology is used by whomever is willing to pay for it, and criminal organizations and adversarial governments have the money to put towards spyware. Let's take a step back and look at this from the perspective of civil rights advocates. The RCMP admitted in 2022 that it used spyware in serious investigations, making the first time a Canadian law enforcement agency publicly acknowledged such practices. Since then, there's been little movement on legislative reforms, despite a parliamentary committee recommending updates to privacy laws. Compare this to global trends. Israel's NSO Group, makers of the notorious Pegasus spyware, came under heavy scrutiny for similar tools being used against journalists and activists. Now, Paragon, also Israeli in origin but owned by the US, is facing comparable controversy. In Italy, for instance, Paragon suspended its contract after its spyware was used against an Italian journalist and pro-immigrant activist. Canada appears to be following a global pattern where high-end surveillance tech designed for counterterrorism and counter-espionage is being adopted for broader law enforcement use. The question is, has there been enough adequate public debate or legal safeguards implemented for its use? Kate Robertson of Citizen Lab summed it up this way. There is a widening gap in public awareness of how extensively spyware is being used in Canada. She emphasized the need for law enforcement to address both security risks and potential human rights violations. My personal take? The deployment of spyware like Graphite, capable of bypassing encryption and accessing highly personal data, are essential tools in combating serious crime and terrorism. However, there is a risk of mission creep. As these tools become more readily used by law enforcement, transparency, oversight, and legal controls need to be considered to prevent privacy violations or abuse. Ontario's possible use of Israeli spyware underscores a growing reliance on military-grade surveillance tools at a provincial level. As law enforcement capabilities evolve in order to keep up with technology and methodologies used by criminal organizations, so too must our legal frameworks and public accountability mechanisms keep up. Looking ahead, expect this debate to gain more traction, especially as watchdog groups like Citizen Lab continue to expose the scope of spyware use. Whether this leads to investigative change remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: the use of this type of technology will not be going away anytime soon. Well, another week, another wrap-up. Thanks for taking the time to become aware of the issues that affect your well-being, your career, and your country. Have a great week, everyone, and as always, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That's a wrap for this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. From espionage-fueled death sentences in China to corporate spying scandals in Silicon Valley, and from Europe's crackdown on foreign interference to Canada's growing use of military-grade spyware, this week's stories highlight the shifting battleground of intelligence, security, and covert operations. Delivering this level of expert insight takes time, dedication, and a deep understanding of the intelligence world, and we appreciate your support. If you found value in today's episode, help spread the word by liking, sharing, or leaving a review. Your engagement helps bring these crucial conversations to a broader audience. And if you'd like to support the show and fuel future episodes, you can do so through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, or Buzzsprout. Whether it's a one-time contribution or ongoing support, it truly makes a difference. You'll find the links in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in. And as Neil always says, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe. See you next week.